Michelle Sullivan, Head of Public Affairs at Boston Scientific.
So it's always great when you're sat in the front and you're watching a little sign come up and it's saying, you have 7 minutes, 6 minutes, 5 minutes, 4 minutes before this thing is going to turn off. And you're like, could I possibly do this without a PowerPoint? And I have no idea. But I can, in fact, see it here. So that's a start, and I'll have a go. So I was introduced as an expert in sustainability. Now, a year ago, if you'd said to me, you're going to stand up at HealthTech Ireland and you're going to have a chat about sustainability and everyone's going to be listening to you as if you know what you're talking about, you'd be like, no way am I going to do that. However, a customer, a very big customer of Boston Scientific, asked myself and a colleague, so what are Boston doing about sustainability? And we went, I don't know. What are we doing about sustainability? Let's go and find out. So we went away and we discovered there was a whole team of engineers and Boffini people working out what they were going to do to reduce our carbon footprint. And they've been working on this since 2017, and we had no idea. And so we put together a presentation and we gave it to the customer, and they said, oh, that's amazing. And I was like, yeah, that's amazing. Don't know what any of it means. And I said, right, if I'm going to talk about this, I need to learn about it. So here's a course. It was at Cambridge. That must be good. I'll go on that. And they went, okay. So I've done this course. It was 8 weeks. It was hell. But it was really interesting. And this topic's become a passion. And I've realized that this title says, how our industry can be at the forefront of addressing the challenges of sustainable healthcare. And what I'm going to do now is just take you through a little journey of what I've been on for the last year, and then pose a few questions, and then I think as a panel, we'll sit and have a discussion. What I've realized is, having met the top experts of sustainability now, and they're all on my LinkedIn, is everybody hasn't got the answers, and everyone's building the plane as it's flying, and they do know what we have to do, but exactly how we're going to do it is really difficult. Because guess what? You mentioned food waste, right? If food waste was a country and an emitter of greenhouse gases, it would be the 3rd biggest emitter of greenhouse gases in the world. And so anyway, let's get back to the beginning. Greenhouse gases. I heard a talk by Al Gore, and he said, the atmosphere of our planet is 5 kilometers high. If you were to set off in your car as if you were driving on a motorway from the planet's surface and drive up to where you go into space, it would take you 5 minutes. And that 5 minutes is what we've been filling up with our greenhouse gases: carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, methane, hydrofluorocarbons, which we heard about ages ago. Remember when we all had to stop using certain things in fridges because of the ozone layer? So Ireland sits in the middle of total greenhouse gas emissions in Europe, somewhere in the middle of the volumes. And when you look at the world, there's different countries that have big shares of emissions. The USA is one of them. China is one of them. If you think about the UK, when you start looking at historic emissions, the line starts back in the 17th century or something in the UK, and it goes along like that. We're the only country emitting in the UK for hundreds of years because we've dug up coal and we've started burning it. And so we've all got a responsibility to do something about this now. And the big contributors to greenhouse gas emissions are the States, the EU, China, and then some of the others. And it's a little bit unfair, really. You'll hear the developing nations all complaining because they haven't got to emit yet, and that's how you're going to build your wealth. You're building your wealth on burning, these substances that are filling up our 5 kilometers of space. with something that's making the world heat up. So what the IPCC said this year, and it did break through the news, it was a little bit unfortunate in its timing, but what they said is, unless global greenhouse gas emissions peak no later than 3 years from now, that's 2022, and are cut nearly in half by 2030, the world will likely experience extreme climate impacts. And the more and more I learned about this, the more I felt like I was living in the film, Don't Look Up. You know, we are all living in the film, Don't Look Up. And as the healthcare sector, we have a responsibility because 4.4% of the world's emissions are from healthcare. And in Ireland, it's exactly 4.4% of emissions from healthcare. You know, some countries are more than that, some countries are less. But if Ireland wants to solve and get to net zero, then they're going to have to do something with the healthcare system, as is every other country. Now, the UK was a global leader. Boris was actually right about this. It's the only thing we've been globally leading on in. And we're a global leader with our net zero NHS plan. And the net zero NHS plan has been devised to show a roadmap for suppliers to try and meet some quite dramatic reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. And, oh, look at this. Oh God! All right, forget it. So I'm going to just talk about some little principles that we can discuss in a bit on our panel. So one of the things I learned at university was linear versus circular. You know, people talk about the circular economy. What is the circular economy? What is the linear economy? The linear economy, you couldn't get a greater definition of the linear economy than medtech, health tech. You know, we dig stuff up out of the ground, we make it into stuff, we use it once, and then we throw it away, or we burn it, or both. And that's totally the opposite of what you have to do if you're running a circular economy. And a circular economy is where you'll make something, and then you'll use it, and then you might reuse it, and then you might remake it, and then you'll recycle it, and you'll reduce what you're doing of all of it while you're going along, and then you'll make it again from what you've recycled it from. And so when you think as a health tech company, you know, what we're talking about here, and we heard some little bits about going back to first principles and R&D, I mean, eventually that is what we're talking about. We're talking about making products that you design to be able to be broken down into their components. And you think about the way that you send them places, and you think about what you put them in, and you try to make it as sustainable as possible, bearing in mind that plastic isn't, you know, the biggest enemy, and plastic is absolutely perfect for designing medical devices. And in fact, when we did a life cycle analysis of one of our products, the big offenders were the precious metals. And the precious metals are still being predominantly, you know, thrown away. And if you want to reduce your carbon footprint of your medical device by half, then get all the precious metals out of it when you finish using it and send them all back to be reused again. So I'm going to just talk a little briefly bit about where the emissions come from in healthcare. And I don't know if you've heard the terms scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. You know, these were magical words of nothingness to me when I was listening to the engineers talking about why we were doing so great at Boston Scientific. So scope 1 and scope 2 is what all the companies are really trying to do something about now, okay? These are their direct emissions. So when we've got our manufacturing sites in Ireland, we've got 3 big ones, right? What we're powering that by needs to move away from anything that is a fossil fuel and into a renewable electricity. And the principles that we need to adhere by in terms of what our manufacturing sites are doing in all of their rooms all need to adhere to reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. And we've just invested 100 million in our Galway plant to have a carbon neutral manufacturing room built. And these are things that are in our control, and these are things that are easier for us to do. And so scope 1 and scope 2, if you're thinking about the health service, it's all the fossil fuels, it's their facilities, their anaesthetics, their fleet and their leased vehicles. And scope 2 is the electricity they use, the energy from well to tank, business travel, waste, water, inhalers. And then we are their scope 3. And as suppliers, we have a scope 3. And scope 3 is all of the people who supply us. And 60% of the healthcare service emissions are us. And what we're doing and how we're doing it. So that's why they're saying we're going to write this into tenders, and that's why they're saying we want to build some sustainable stuff to do with all of this, right? And we've got a bit of a problem right now because everybody's making it up as they go along and building the plane as they go along. And so country A is doing this, and country B is doing that, and country C cares about the plastics you've got in the thing, and country D cares about the fact that you've got all this packaging, and what are you going to do about that? And we've got to start to get carbon literate. And we've got to start to understand what all these terms mean, just like I did, just because I like knowing stuff and I don't like talking about stuff I don't know what I'm talking about. And we've got to start to help partner with the health service to let them understand this is what we can do. These are things we can improve. We could all club together and do, some better format of deliveries. We could move our deliveries from aeroplanes to road. We could start to recycle our precious metals. Here's a program where we're all clubbing together to do that. These are the sorts of things that we can think about. And then you've all got to go back to your companies and say, well, at some point we're going to have to start thinking when we design our products, as was just mentioned, how are we designing them? Are we designing them with this circular economy thing where we've got to break it down when we've finished it? We can't just throw it away and burn it anymore. We're going to have to do better than that. So I haven't stuck to my presentation at all. I don't know, I mean, we're looking at it. But I think it's worth thinking about all of these different topics that I've mentioned when we have our discussion. There's the packaging part, there's the devices part where we've got to break it all down. There's anaesthetics. Every hour in an operating theatre is 35 kilograms of carbon emissions. Every journey to and from a hospital is 18 kilograms of carbon emissions. One bottle of desflurane, one of the anaesthetics that everybody's stopping using because it's very carbon emitting, if you use one bottle of that, it's the equivalent of burning 440 kilograms of coal. This is what our service is doing. And so we've just got to pick up the baton and say, okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to do it? What can we do? What can't we do? What does good look like? And have a go. So I'm going to stop there because this wasn't quite what I was intending to present, but I hope I've taught you something, and I hope I've given you some things to think about, and I'm happy to.